It's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Always appreciate the opportunity to fill in for Gary and Eric. And by the way, they will be returning here in a week after the July 4th holiday. You folks have heard of, are they calling this Alligator Alcatraz? Alligator Alcatraz. This was a big story last week. I heard Gary and Eric talking about it, and I spoke about it on my morning show. My name is Dan Mandis. I'm filling in for Gary and Eric, and I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk, 99.7 WTN, 6 to 10 Eastern, 5 to 9 Central. Tune in, 99.7 WTN is the website.com. So there is a big story about this. I guess it's supposed to open at some point this week, the Alligator Alcatraz. It is a immigrant detention center that Florida is building in the middle of the Florida Everglades. They call it Alligator Alcatraz.
We rolled out this proposal last week. It's a location we've been looking at with law enforcement for a while. 30 square miles surrounded by the Everglades down in South Florida.
Yep.
Prevents the unique opportunity for a low-cost detention facility because the perimeter is already set by Mother Nature.
Yeah. I mean, there's alligators, there's snakes, all that kind of stuff. And you have these people on the left. They're losing their ever-loving mind, but doesn't matter. It's opening apparently this week. That, by the way, is Florida Attorney General James Youthmeyer. And right now, this area, it is an airfield, but you know the Florida Everglades, right? I mean, everybody does. You've got alligators all over the place, very swampy. You've got giant snakes like pythons and rattlesnakes, the Florida cottonmouth. They also, by the way, have American crocodiles.
We'll have some light infrastructure, a lot of heavy-duty tent facilities, trailer facilities. We don't need to build a lot of brick and mortar.
Wow.
Again, it will be temporary, and thankfully Mother Nature does a lot on the perimeter. We'll have a little bit of additions needed, but there's really nowhere to go. If you're housed there, if you're detained there, there's no way in, no way out.
Listen, Donald Trump, he's been asking for the states to help out with all of these, illegal aliens that they need to detain in one place and then fly them to, whatever country will take them, whether it's their country of origin or maybe a third country. But the bottom line is Trump needs to be able to detain them at some place and then fly them out. Well, that's part of what Alligator Alcatraz is going to be all about. Now, this thing, originally they said that it was supposed to be ready by July, but it apparently is opening either now or in the next several days. This is going to cost $540 million a year to run, and they may get some reimbursement from FEMA, but they've started work, and according to the Florida Attorney General, they are going to prioritize criminal illegal aliens at this facility.
We'll prioritize criminal aliens as the Trump administration has called on us to do, as was discussed with Tom Homan yesterday. I mean, there's 600,000 or so criminal aliens in this country that have already been convicted of other crimes. Yeah. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. We've got to get these dangerous people off the streets, first and foremost, but then we've got to enforce rule of law across the board. Yeah. If you are not legally in this country, you should not be here, and we've got an obligation to support the Trump administration.
And I love the fact that it's lower cost, and what? I was thinking about this, though. So I understand they're trying to keep the bad guys in, the illegal alien gang members. They're trying to keep them in, make sure they don't get out. But how do you keep those slithering snakes out of the prison? Because, these snakes, they can, I've had them in my house. I don't know how in the world they get in, but they do. So how do you keep them out? I'm trying to figure out how they're going to do that. But I love this. Because Donald Trump has been asking for help in dealing with all of these illegal aliens. And so this is going to be a huge impact project for the Republicans and for Donald Trump.
Attorney General James Uthmeier, he says the potential site would serve as a 3-in-1 immigration enforcement facility. It would house detainees, process legal cases, and serve as a deportation hub.
There you go. You got like 1,000 beds. I've seen some reports say 1,000 beds. I've seen other reports say 5,000 beds. So I assume it's going to be like a modular building and such. No need for the usual brick and mortar. And that works out well because the second we get all these folks out, you can close Alligator Alcatraz.
The 30-square-mile property in question is owned by Miami-Dade County. It has been used for military and law enforcement training in the past, so Uthmeier says officials are familiar with the area as the Florida National Guard will play a key role in operation. They have offered military attorneys to be trained as immigration judges to expedite the legal process. Now, the proposal is designed to detain and hold people for weeks or even months. Uthmeier says this can be a low-cost site due to the natural terrain surrounding it.
If somebody were to get out, there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Only the alligators and pythons are waiting. That's why I like to call it Alligator Alcatraz.
So there you go. Then you have these people.
It's not good for our people. It's not good for our environment. It's not good for our quality of life.
Protesters.
It's a trigger, a canary in the coal mine of a much deeper systemic problem. And we're seeing it here being built literally in the middle of our Everglades, right next to the Miccosukee homelands. This is an embarrassment, not just for the Everglades, not just for South Florida, but for our entire country.
So what's embarrassing, I would say to that protester, what's embarrassing for our country is the fact that we have a system set up now where we have so many illegal aliens, we have no place to put them. So now we've got to shove them in the middle of the Florida Everglades. And by the way, we're not, knocking down part of the Everglades. What we're doing is these are all temporary buildings that can be torn down as quickly as they are being put up. It's not a huge deal. We have all of these issues with all of these illegal aliens, and we're doing everything that we possibly can to deal with them. And if the Democrats are, sitting here saying, well, they need their due process. All right, well, then they're going to get their due process right there at the Florida Everglades. Immigrant advocates criticizing the move, saying that it was creating a new form of detention outside the scope of the federal government. I think these folks, and I spoke about this earlier in the broadcast, these folks they'll complain about anything. They will complain about anything. By the way, real quick, it looks like Donald Trump is going to visit Alligator Alcatraz this week. And over the weekend, protesters lined up the highway in the Florida Everglades to oppose Alligator Alcatraz. Although I'm sure that if you asked them, what exactly is it that is your problem with Alligator Alcatraz? Because it's not hurting any of the plant life or the swamp life or anything. It's literally sitting there in the middle of the Florida Everglades. And people are loving it. I mean, at least on the conservative side. The phone number is 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. And we're talking about the crackdown now on truckers who cannot speak English. And there's a couple of stories in the news today about truckers who don't speak English, they don't know our roads, and they're getting into fatal traffic accidents where they're killing a bunch of folks. And the more that I see these stories about illegal aliens driving these trucks, the more infuriating it is. Donald Trump's executive order has gone into effect now here in the last several days, where if they're going to drive a truck, they've got to know how to speak English. They've got to know how to understand and write English, and they need to be able to drive these trucks more efficiently and safely. A lot of truckers calling up. First one is Roberto calling from Pennsylvania on Red Eye Radio. Roberto, what do you think about all this?
Hi, and good morning. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come on the air. I wanted to voice my opinion because I had my license since I was 16 years old. I'm 56. I worked with my father for 23 years in his business, 8.5 on my own with multiple trucks, and I'm mechanically inclined. Now, I occasionally do road service work, right? And I come across some folks that I see front rims, cracked, belts and hoses out of place, and they don't care. Some of them, they don't care. But also, you ask them a question, and they got to pull out a translator, right, to be able to communicate with you. And I'm saying, what is that? At 3 o'clock in the morning, you find them at a Love truck stop or at a Pilot, and you ask them a question, and they're like, they don't understand. So imagine if a concerned citizen has a question, hey, what are you hauling? Law enforcement needs to speak to them. They need to communicate. Nobody understands anything. And I feel that I'm an immigrant. I came up here when I was small. I studied. I became naturalized. I learned. And the very first thing that you should do when you come to this country is learn the law, obey the law, and prevent yourself from having trouble. Very simple. But you're driving a vehicle, a commercial vehicle, and you should be responsible for that in every aspect. But you need to communicate and be able, besides, obviously, to read all the laws. That's how I feel about that. If I can add to that, I did part investigation work a little bit in the mid-'90s, and we conducted an investigation for Key Power Institute in Miami, Florida. When I was working for a company up there. And at that time, they were, I'm not saying issuing license, but we went in there for a reason. I can't reveal everything that happened, but there's people, not only Hispanics like myself, I'm Cuban, people from India, people from all kinds of other countries coming in through Canada, and they're here, and they put them as a team driver. They pay them less. We make less. My wife lost her left arm in a horrific car accident. I am the breadwinner of the family. And you know something? I'm out here 4 weeks giving it hell, and then I earned the right to go home, spend maybe 3 or 4 days off, get a little food, kiss my wife on the cheek and say, hey, we got to get out, we got to hustle because I got bills that I got to pay and bills we got to, kids need the shoes and adults need the toys.
Yeah.
And I hustle and I pay taxes. But people, they come in, and of course, they don't know anything. Big companies are bringing them in, and you see them here. I honk because they pass me by. There's a tire oil in here. I honk at them. They look at me like I'm stupid. And I'm mechanically inclined. I'm certified ASE. Come on, I'm able to spot a couple of things when they're bad. They don't give a damn. Yeah. So that causes accidents. That causes problems with people.
Well, Russell, Roberto, I will say this, is that you've got a great story. I love your story. You came here, you learned the language, you studied the roads, and you did everything. It sounds to me, anyway, like you did everything right, and I appreciate the call. This is Phil calling from Cincinnati, Ohio, on Red Eye Radio. Hey, Phil.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was going to let you know. In Ohio, I know when I took my test, went through my CDL school, the schools don't benefit by helping them cheat because they make their money regardless. But the state, on the other hand, they allow, at least here right now, they're allowing them to take their CDL test in whatever language they come from, whether it be Africa, South America, wherever. They can take it in their own language. And I deal with all kinds of them that they don't know where they're going. That's the problem. They'll come in the wrong way, even though just because the GPS says, yeah, go that way.
Right. Well, and Phil, let me ask you this. Hey, Phil, let me ask you. It's got to be frustrating because you're dealing, I'm assuming, with these non-English speaking truck drivers for a long time. Are they not taking the initiative to, as they're here for a while, are they not taking the initiative and learning the language as they go?
Why learn it if you don't have to?
Yeah.
They get there. Why spend money to learn something if you're basically given the job? You go in, you take the test in your language. The test is not easy, but if you had taken English, I guarantee that most of them probably would not pass it because it's that hard. If the regular driver's test was that hard, we'd have a lot less drivers on the road.
Phil, do you think the executive order from Donald Trump, do you think that's going to do any good? It went into effect a few days ago.
I hope it does. If they enforce it and they go check on all these drivers from other countries to see if they can actually read or not just pull them over, but go have somebody, and that's time, money that I don't know how much you're going to spend on it, but they need to check. We do a physical every 2 years. So how about making a mandatory add it when you get your physical? You got to make sure you can read and understand English language, too.
Yeah. It's got to be frustrating for you guys, especially when we start talking about the suppressed wages, which I know is something I've spoken a lot about, and I appreciate the call, Phil. Thank you very much. This is Randy calling from Ohio on Red Eye Radio. Hey, Randy, go ahead.
Hi, Dan. How are you? Thank you so much for your show. I appreciate it. Listen to you guys every week.
Thank you.
As I make this trip. My wife was she was actually backed into on April 11th by a driver who was driving a Conestoga drop-deck trailer. I'm sure he's probably overweight. Backed into her from a stop sign, hit her, pulled forward, backed into her again, and couldn't speak a word of English. And I pulled a letter out, and I said, read this. And he was just saying, my boss, my boss. I said, you can't speak a word of English. You're driving a semi. And when the officer showed up, I said, on your sleeve, it says you're an officer of the law. And so you understand the law that you cannot drive a commercial vehicle if you can't read and write English, correct? And he said, yes. And looked down. A lot of the police officers are embarrassed. I think their hands were tied through this last 4 or 5 years that they've flooded our United States with these people driving trucks. And people don't think about one major thing here is that, remember New Orleans when the guy came over the curb with the pickup truck?
I do.
Now, what are you gonna do when they come over the curb with an 80,000-pound rig, and there's no police officer or police vehicle that's going to stop a semi? And when we bombed Iran, and I'm thinking, wow, geez, this is a good time for the cells inside the United States driving the rigs to go off.
And Randy, not only are you right, but it's something that I worry about every single day, and I hope your wife gets better. Appreciate the call. Dan Mandis here. This is Red Eye Radio.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by Howes Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
Having a 4th of July cookout? From a food safety perspective, keep in mind the temperature. As USDA food safety expert Meredith Carruthers explains, it's not just about cooking meats to proper internal temperatures.
The food thermometer is going to be your best friend at the grill because it's unsafe to eat food that has not been fully cooked to a full safe internal temperature because it's possible that bacteria could still be there.
But also, with many parts of the country experiencing 90-degree plus high temperatures in recent days and going into Independence Day.
If you are serving your food on a picnic table outside and the weather is above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, that food is only going to have 1 hour before it is potentially unsafe and could make you sick.
Instead of the normal 2-hour time window for food safety. Carruthers says no matter the cookout location, a reliable cold source is needed both before and after food is cooked. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis in for Gary and Eric. They return in a week. All right, coming up, we've got a couple of stories to cover for you, some updates on some broadcasts, some stories that we had earlier for you, including a crazy story out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where a guy starts a fire seemingly on purpose. And his intent was that when the first responders would arrive, he would start shooting. That story for you is coming up. Also, Iran is in the news this morning. Details straight ahead. It is Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE, 866-907-3339.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
Hey, it's kind of interesting where I'm on Libs of TikTok, right? So I love Libs of TikTok. The left hates Libs of TikTok because, well, what they do is they magnify the bad behavior of people on the other side. So Libs of TikTok, and I'm watching this and I'm stunned. Now, I don't know Canadian law, but, you know, they've got their gay pride parades going on all across, I guess, the world, because this is in Toronto. I know that's happening across the country here in America, too. But all these people are, like, completely naked, like, literally completely naked. They got their private parts all, you know, blurred out, but how is that legal? And what's horrifying is, you know, you see all of these people here, and you got kids, you know, in the audience and whatever. If a parent wants to bring them to a, you know, parade where there's a bunch of, you know, people that are naked and running around, I guess that's a parental decision, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in the conversation regarding these gay pride parades here, and I guess June is Gay Pride Month, is that they can't really figure out. This is what I love. The activists cannot figure out why it is that they are suddenly lacking in corporate sponsorships. Now, I want you to think about this. I just told you that I'm watching on X one of these parades where everybody is just, I mean, buck naked. They're walking down the street buck naked. And I've seen some of these parades here in America where they're not completely naked, although I'm sure that it's happening somewhere, but they're wearing like Speedos or, you know, maybe a little loincloth that is really needs to be a little longer, if you know what I mean. And they're baffled. They can't understand why it is that their corporate sponsors are leaving them. Well, a couple of things have happened. Number one is I think part of what's going on is the only reason these corporate sponsors were sponsoring these kind of events is because they were afraid of the boycott, you know, from the left. And they were afraid of the boycott from, you know, the gay community, so on and so forth. So I think that's part of it. And I think at some point somebody just said, you know what? If we've learned anything over the past year or so, it's that both sides can boycott. And I believe that they began to realize that conservatives boycotting, they can lose a lot more money than if, you know, you have people that are upset because you're no longer sponsoring the gay pride parade all upset at you. You know what I mean? And the other thing is maybe, just maybe, I would say to the folks who are, you know, dismayed at why it is that the corporate sponsorships no longer want to support the gay pride parade. Well, maybe it's because of the content. Maybe it's because they don't want their name affiliated with this kind of behavior. I mean, listen, to each his own. And if this is what they're allowed to do in Canada, knock themselves out. But I believe that one of the things that people figured out when Donald Trump was elected, and you folks know this, when Donald Trump was elected, heck, we can even go before that, the whole Bud Light thing, where suddenly people began to realize, you know what? Conservatives have been woken up in this country, and they're pissed off. And this is a big group of people that we don't want to anger. And by the way, the only reason some of these people, some of these organizations have been sponsoring, you know, some of these gay pride events is because they were afraid of the boycott. But that's part of the dynamic out there today. 866-90-RED-I, 866-907-3339. And let's be honest, there are some horrible things that happen at these gay pride events where they just That's just gross. There's no other way to say it. It's just, I don't even know how to describe it. And I think we're already in the morning drive time in some cities. So I don't really want to get into, all of the horrific details. I think it's going to be really interesting when Donald Trump goes to the Alligator Alcatraz. I think that's going to be a lot of fun to see what the president has to say. And, earlier, and it was interesting. Earlier, I was talking about how Donald Trump has had an incredible, 5-6 months. Since he took the oath of office, I don't know if I've ever seen a president have as good of, 6 months or so as Donald Trump has. Have you? Have you ever seen a president have as good of a, first 6 months as Donald Trump has? And I do understand that we always seem to talk about, the first 100 days. Okay, well, first 100 days. I got to tell you, I'll put Donald Trump's first 6 months in front of anybody. And I got a lot of thumbs up. Earlier I was saying, because, I'm not a Donald Trump defender. I'm just telling you, I'm not a Donald Trump defender. I am a conservative. There are a lot of things that I disagree with Donald Trump on, too. Just to let you know, I don't believe that we should be negotiating with Iran because that's negotiating with terrorists. That's number one. And I don't necessarily feel like we should be propping up China, which is what, Donald Trump is doing both of those. But one of the things that's always bothered me, and I'm going to repeat this because I had such, positive feedback. By the way, you can follow me on X at Dan Mandis Show. So you got all these people that are out there, all of these former presidents, right? George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. And you look at them and Bill Clinton, if I forgot to mention him. And so they all look down on him. I don't know if you sometimes when you see situations, I think the last one was Jimmy Carter, where you have all of these presidents in one place. And they always seem to look down on Donald Trump. Now, in the last one, Obama actually engaged Donald Trump in some sort of a conversation. But by and large, they kind of look down on Donald Trump. They feel like he's a buffoon. Well, you know what I was kind of curious about? Why it is that George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and certainly Joe Biden, why they look down on Donald Trump when they have had far, far bigger train wrecks than Donald Trump has? And I want you to think about that. The political elite in Washington, D.C. is something that I've always been kind of interested in, just because I'm a political guy and I find these kinds of things fascinating. But I've read the stories and I've heard the interviews and I've read the books about how they feel about Donald Trump. Well, my 2 cents on that whole thing would be these 4 currently living presidents, they have nothing on Donald Trump. Absolutely nothing. George Bush, of course, he got us involved in the Iraq War, Afghanistan. We spent decades there. And by the way, never found those weapons of mass destruction. You've got Bill Clinton, could have taken out Osama bin Laden, chose not to. Barack Obama, of course, killed thousands of innocents with his drone program. And, of course, Joe Biden completed another train wreck. I don't even know what to say about Joe Biden. The show is just getting ready to wrap up. If I had started the show with this topic, I would still be going on the problems that Joe Biden gave America. But you folks already know, right? We all know. It's almost like we can all just sort of collectively look at each other and say, Biden, and just kind of nod, like we all just know. But why do they always look down on Donald Trump? Like he's that bull in the china shop that everybody thought that he would be, which in reality, he's not even close. He might say some things that, some of the people on the left or some of the political elite on the right, that they don't like that he says. Well, that's all fine. But guess what? Trump's had a lot of success, especially in this second term. in the first 6 months. I mean, he had the big Supreme Court ruling on Friday, where the Supreme Court said that these lower courts simply cannot issue these nationwide injunctions against an elected president of the United States. I mean, that was huge. You could talk about, with the Trump successes, talk about the border. Talk about the illegal immigration that he is stopping, or the illegal aliens that he is getting rid of. And so the more that you have these folks on the left, and they're kind of, looking at Trump, they're thumbing their nose at him, and they're looking down on the president. You know what? They can do that if they want, but the reality is, I believe that history is going to look very good on Donald Trump. His spending bill, it looks like that's going to pass. Whether or not that, stands the test of time as far as how that's going to look in, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years from now, we'll have to wait and see. But it does look like that is more than likely going to pass. The bombings against Iran's nuclear facilities, that was a huge success. Overall, the economy, the stock market seems to be doing well. You can always play with the numbers. So far, the tariffs are not having the negative impact that some say that they would. That's huge. And he got a deal done with China and the UK on those tariffs. He just got back from that NATO trip where he got them to increase their dues up to 5%. In other words, Trump is doing really, really well. And the more that these folks on the left, kind of thumb their nose at the president, look down on Donald Trump and his supporters, the worse they look to us, because they were so clearly stuck in their own anti-Trump bubble. But the reality is that the majority of the American people understand and appreciate what Donald Trump is doing. You can see it in the polling. Some polling, the president is going down, but within the Republican Party, and he brought a lot of people to the Republican Party, Donald Trump is doing really, really well. Now, very quickly, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, what a crazy story. You're going to be hearing about this all day long. Guy allegedly goes up into the mountains of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and he starts a fire. As the first responders, he calls 911, and then as the first responders start to show up, he starts shooting at them, killing 2 and wounding many. This is what it sounded like as the first responders arrived on the scene and saw all of that carnage.
Central BC 5, BC 5 up 6. Some law enforcement right now. There's an active shooter zone. They're shot. BC 3's down, BC 1's down. Everybody's shot up here. Law enforcement, code 3 now up here.
Horrible, horrible story. And I'm seeing anywhere from like 2, 3, 5, 8, 11 shot. 2 dead. Another one in critical condition. Many others supposedly shot as well. I think they're trying to figure out. They have the entire mountain shut down. And as this officer is arriving on the scene, you've got all of these others that are trying to tell everyone, don't move, don't leave your cabins. Everybody just stand down and keep your head down. And then this police officer realized that trying to get his fellow officers, his fellow first responders to the scene was actually not a good idea because the guy was still shooting.
551, 10 or 14, up here. Stop. Get out of the way. 10 or 14, answer first 551. Do not come up here. 51 copies. Remain in staging.
Now, luckily, the shooter, alleged shooter, is dead, and they're trying now to put out the fire, and we'll keep you updated on that story all day long here on Talk Radio. And Red Eye Radio returns next.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here, Gary and Eric. They return next Sunday night, Monday morning. Looking forward to that. You can follow me on the socials at Dan Mandis Show. I'm on Facebook. I'm on X. I'm on Instagram as well. Again, that is at Dan Mandis Show. I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk 99.7 WTN, which actually starts in about 10 minutes. Now, a couple of stories you want to watch out for today as the day continues to progress. Number one, and one of my favorite stories, mentioned this earlier, is Donald Trump is going to visit Alligator Island this week. Not sure if it's going to be today, but that is definitely one that will make the left's heads explode. Appreciate you listening to Red Eye Radio.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.